If you were with us 2 episodes ago, I was talking about how I used to play hide and seek when I was young, and how every now and then we'd get bored of playing by the rules of staying on the ground level because there were only so many spots to hide in my grandmother's house, and how we would often go upstairs quite cheekily, much to the detriment and pain and frustration of whoever was trying to find us, the seeker, because they expected us to be on the ground level. When they open their eyes, they're looking around at the ground level only, because upstairs is out of bounds, and in their mind it doesn't exist. So in that episode 33 of the With Joe Wehbe podcast, we talked about, we asked the question, are you playing the wrong game? Wow. There's a concept in, computer gaming or video games called non-player character. Non-player character are the other characters that are in the game. You know, take your big Grand Theft Auto, The Sims, I don't know, FIFA, it's my favorite, Call of Duty. Other players in the game that are not controlled by users, people with remotes. They're just digital, pre-programmed parts of the world. Kind of like pawns in the Truman Show. And their existence is very basic and simple, right? They're non-player. They're just pre-programmed. Everything is set. Now, they're often talked about in philosophical contexts because people believe that a lot of the way everyone out there, all the other people in the world live, reflects a non-player character. People who are going around completely pre-programmed with no autonomy, no direction in their lives. They're following all the green lights just because they're green, and they're not steering and driving, to borrow from McConaughey. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but the thing that would be wrong with that is they're not in control, so they can't steer themselves away from trouble. The deceptive part is that they have the illusion of control, and that's a little sad. If people think they have control over their lives when really they don't, and they end up in dark places that they don't know how to back out of. And the reason is they don't know that they can drive. They never learnt how to drive, but they think they've been driving the whole time. As I always say, we're born in the passenger seat of life. And those of us who are born in the passenger seat of life are born playing the wrong game. The default we fall into, particularly in the West, right, just what I'm normally talking about here, the default is to accumulate distractions and external achievements. Like we've talked about episode after episode on this still very young podcast. But these are the ideas I think are important to ram home. We are not born in the driver's seat of our own life. We have to learn to drive, and driving is a conscious decision. It's not something that happens really by accident. At some point, we have to decide we're going to take the wheel and steer. And it's scary the first time. Once you get used to it, you're the one in control, for better or for worse. So most of us go into the wrong game. Now, to tie that to some of the other language we've used on this podcast, the first 3 episodes were on the minimum viable lifestyle. In my opinion, very few of us start living our minimum viable lifestyle or pursuing that by default. I think it's a very active thing we have to do. At some point, we have to realize that and then pursue it. Because I know a lot of people way older than I am who still don't. Right? We've talked about Astro the dog. We've talked about that level of pre-wiring we have, how it serves an evolutionary purpose. Because we can't learn everything for the first time every time we're born. Right? We can't learn by trial and error. to be afraid of heights, because falling off a cliff or a building can kill us. We need some level of pre-wiring to get us through. But because of the different world we now find ourselves in, a lot of that pre-wiring, if we lean into it too heavily, just makes us non-player characters. So walk through this with me. We have a level of pre-wiring in the brains we're given, equivalent to the experience of opening our eyes for that game of hide and seek I talk about, and looking at the ground level and assuming that what we see first is the entire scope of our reality. To quote that harrowing line from that movie, The Truman Show, Ed Harris says it in the movie, I don't know his character's name. We accept the reality of the world we're presented with. He says it when he's being interviewed by a reporter on why Truman Burbank, played by Jim Carrey, doesn't realize he's in a completely constructed world, a world that is completely artificial, filled with actors that revolve around him, turning him into a reality TV show. And the reporter asks why he doesn't realize. And he doesn't realize because he's never been given any reason to think otherwise. Because by default, we accept the world and the reality that we're given. Because why would we be wired from evolution's perspective to think any differently? So if that's the wrong game, is pursuing, waking up, looking at this reality, and just pursuing the tip of the iceberg we see everyone else pursuing, that's the wrong game. That's the default game. If that's our default, and we're to pursue that, what's the right game? When I was talking about hide and seek, it's how we used to hide upstairs. We used to hide in this non-obvious place. It was reachable, but it wasn't obvious. The flashlight wasn't shining on that. It was shining on the rest of the house. The way I perceive it, and I'd encourage you to think of your own way of thinking about this if this doesn't serve you, but the way I perceive it is that there's not necessarily an upstairs in the real game as much as there is an inside. So if the real game of living, of life, and if you're born and your survival is not under threat, if you have your minimum viable lifestyle, then all you're doing is basically playing a game. That's all you're doing is playing, which we talked about in Gillage, playing. How liberating is that? It's what Branson does. He plays, he has fun, he makes decisions based on fun. And if we're born with our survival locked in stone, for most of us that's the reality, we're playing. Yet the game, that game is not fun, and it's not because a lot of us are playing the wrong game. So what do I mean when I say there's an inside? Well, if we're playing hide and seek, the solution is hiding inside. We look at the world outside and look for things we can do and places we can go and people we can meet out there to make the game fun. To make us feel like we fit in and we're playing this game and we're not an NPC, we're not a non-player character. The reality is the game you're playing is inside. It's how you view yourself. Your entire experience is largely contained within this frame. To some extent, we empathize and have experience reacting to what goes on around us. We're not completely cut off from the outside world in our experience, but largely it's in here. Not only is it not apparent when we're born what game we're playing, the rules of that game are not apparent. The rules are complicated. And what you've started today is a very long journey of figuring out what the rules are. So, I know this is quite dense, and it's probably if you're listening to this in the morning on your drive or commute to work, I've probably thrown your whole day into disarray with a real kick in the guts. But the thing to ponder for today, perhaps, is just, what's the game? What feels fun and what doesn't? What bits do you enjoy and what don't? And what comes from here? Like what inside, what's that voice inside saying all the time? Is your gut saying what I'm doing today doesn't fit me? Or is it saying I'm excited for this? Knowing the difference. So it's a fascinating, ongoing conversation. So in terms of, enduring the game, we'll talk about that in one more episode on this topic tomorrow. But for now, just remember some housekeeping. Obviously, you can go back to the start of the podcast and listen to these in order to get them in the order they were intended to be consumed in, that I think is most powerful. If not, sometimes it's good to go back and just refresh if ideas resonate with you. You don't have to keep going. You can always go back and refresh ideas, right? And exercise them like muscles if something in particular needs to be bolstered. Apart from that, if you need any more information, there's always the blog, www.withjoewehbe.com/blog, with everything to do with the writing and the podcast and corresponding blog posts, which inspire all these episodes. But apart from that, remember, most importantly, the doors, right? To share this with people who it might open a door for and give them some self-awareness and give them a challenge about what game they're playing and why aren't they playing the right game? Because the best way to open 1,000 doors for you, of course, is to concentrate on opening doors for others. Thank you. This has been the With Joe Wehbe podcast, and we'll see you again tomorrow.